since the beginning of 2025, when Trump took office and the unending terrors of tariffs, laws, and job cuts went into effect, people have been making jokes about any pop culture from 2008 making a comeback is a recession indicator. Platform sneakers are on the rise. This is a recession indicator. Snooki spotted at the club could only be a recession indicator. Me parting my hair like this? Yeah. A recession has been indicated. Everything is indicating a coming recession now. If I so much as see a High School Musical reunion anytime soon, I just know I'm about to lose my apartment. But there's one thing we have all missed that truly indicated a recession. Something that was right under our noses for the last 4 years now. That's right. The real recession indicator is that manga had a boom again. Just think about it, okay? The last time we had a manga boom was in 2002 and 2003, and you know what happened 5 years later? The 2008 market crash. Wake up, sheeple! Manga is what indicates the downfall of American society. If you have watched any of my previous manga publisher videos, you would know that around the 15-minute mark, there is always a crater-sized market crash just waiting to happen. Each time I have talked about these companies, the inevitable recession happens and either makes or breaks that publisher. Tokyopop, CMX, GoKomi, and so many more got crushed under the pressure, while a few others like Yen Press or Viz emerged from the market crash rubble, beaten but still standing. It is because of the sharp rise and quick fall that the manga industry in America is what it is today. Ever cautious and playing it as safe as possible out of the fear that what happened before could very well happen again. But you guys know me. This is about shoujo manga, as it will always be. And the 2008 market crash had both a huge impact on the manga industry at large, as well as shoujo manga at small. As we all know, the manga market right now is solely focused on shonen and seinen, and that's pretty much it. Big promotions at cons, content collaborations, award nominations, book scan charts. Anything that has to do with manga revolves around shonen and seinen. The most you'll see of shoujo manga anywhere in your peripherals is gonna be from Sailor Moon, and maybe even Cardcaptors if you're lucky. Perpetually keeping shoujo in the 90s and 2000s as if nothing else has been made ever since. What's crazy though is that before the 2008 recession, this was not really the case. Yes, shonen series were still super big. I'm not saying that they weren't still dominating, but shoujo at the time was nothing to sneeze at either. You'd see about a baker's dozen on bookscan charts, and cons were full of shoujo cosplayers, not just Sailor Moon. You had anime adaptations, shoujo magazines, and most of all, companies clamoring to get that girl comic reader to buy their product. Before the recession hit, girls fueled the manga boom. And shoujo manga is a large reason why we have a thriving manga market in America in the first place. So, how did the 2008 recession cause the downfall of shoujo manga in the United States? And how have we got to the declining state of shoujo in America today? Obligatory? Thanks, Obama. And speaking of Obama, I am so gracious to have with me here today someone who keeps me in line and make sure that I remain calm. We have my anger translator here.
Hi.
Manga has been around in the States since at least the late 70s, but it wasn't really until the late 80s and 90s where it gained enough popularity that publishers spawned completely dedicated to publishing manga. One of the biggest still to this day is Viz Media, which was founded in 1986 and partially owned by Shogakukan and now Shueisha as well. Their first big hit didn't come until 1992 though, when they published Ranma Half, introducing the comedic world of Rumiko Takahashi to America. Contrary to popular belief though, Takahashi is a shonen mangaka, and Ranma as well as Inuyasha are both shonen. So shoujo was still an entirely unknown entity in America at this time, since, girls reading comics was unheard of. That is until Rachel Thorne came along. One of the few people in this industry who pushed for shoujo availability and saw both the uniqueness and potential in the demographic. She was a freelance translator who was able to convince Viz to publish the first ever shoujo manga in English in 1996, titled 4 Shoujo Stories, with a tongue-in-cheek subtitle called It's Not Just Girls Stuff. This collected anthology of 4 different shoujo titles, one of which being the first translation of They Were 11, was an absolute feat to behold. Not just because it was the first shoujo manga in English, but also because there were so many highly regarded mangaka featured inside. There was, however, one glaring issue with this release. Viz didn't have the rights to publish all of these manga into one anthology. They were only given the rights to publish them in individual trade paperback or floppy format, meaning their publishing of 4 shoujo stories was not just a breach of contract, but also trust. Not too long after the anthology hit the shelves, it quickly disappeared from them. And it basically took an entire decade to find out why this happened from Rachel Thorne herself. When they asked me to write the intro, I asked in surprise, "They gave you permission to collect these stories?" The editor, now retired, said, "If we ask them, they'll say no. But if we go ahead and do it, they may complain, but what can they do about it? Pull the book off the shelves?" Well, that's exactly what they did. Yes, you heard that right. 4 Shoujo Stories is no longer available, and you can only own it if you shell out $100 because Viz fucked around and found out. This incident being the first time we got shoujo manga in English is a great example of how shoujo gets treated in this industry for the last decades. It's something that can be tested out, but not given the proper time behind. Little did Viz know that Moto Hagio is your mangaka's favorite mangaka. But that would be hard to know when you didn't respect the license enough that you bought in the first place. I will give credit to Viz for not completely ditching shoujo after this absolute disaster. However, I would still largely say that's probably due to Rachel Thorne. The next attempt at bringing shoujo to America didn't come until 1997 when Tokyopop launched their magazine called Mixine. This magazine was a direct competitor of Viz's manga magazine called Manga Vision. But Mixine had something that Manga Vision didn't. It had Sailor Moon and Magic Knight Rayearth, 2 series that are money-making machines now, but were mere cult status back in the 90s, since no American broadcast of either of these anime were that successful. Essentially, these 2 guaranteed sellers in the 2020s were inconsequential to the industry because they were made for girls. Once again, Rachel Thorne writes about this time in the anime and manga market. I have no idea how Levy got the rights to Sailor Moon, but at the time, those rights would indeed have seemed worthless to most people in the entertainment media industry of the day. While the animation was starting to gain traction in Canada, American broadcasters hadn't even tried. In 1995, they put it in some laughable crack of dawn slot and let it die. Because, after all, girls don't watch cartoons, right? Well, Sailor Moon may have not done that great for broadcast media, but it did do amazing for Tokyopop. It was far and away the first commercial success for a shoujo series in America. According to Tokyopop, the 3rd graphic novel volume was the #1 seller of the month that it came out, and this success is even what they credited as being what catapulted their manga publisher to become one of the bigs. It's also due to Sailor Moon's success that Tokyopop continued to try out more shoujo, like Mars, Karikano, Card Captors, and so many more, making this company the first to introduce more commercially appealing shoujo for a younger age bracket of girls. In fact, Tokyopop was selling so well that they decided to do something absolutely crazy in 2002. They sold their manga in graphic novel format in chain bookstores. Prior to the switch, most manga were sold in floppy or trade paperback format, which meant that they were sold in comic book stores. Places that may be more inclusive now, but back then weren't so welcoming to teen girls.
Comic shops hate girls.
Elaborate.
I mean, I guess I can elaborate, but it's a commonly known fact, and it's a lot better now than it was, but largely comic shops really discriminated against girls and made any women of all ages feel entirely unwelcome by their staff and by their other clientele as well. Comic shops notoriously, back, I want to say like 20 years ago, when I started getting into wanting to buy comics on a weekly basis, I even had struggles going in because they were so against basically anyone that was not already an existing customer. But there are so many anecdotes and examples online of people who have complained about their local shops being terrible, and this just drove women away from the comic shops. And where are they going to go when they don't feel welcomed at these shops? Of course, they're going to show up at bookstores and libraries where the staff is not treating them like a pariah that needs to leave immediately.
Tokyopop saw the potential to sell to a more general audience though, and I would say that's by and large because they had so much shoujo manga under their belt. So putting these manga into chain bookstores like Walden's or Borders, which were attached to malls, made it 10 times more accessible for that audience. Changing the format changed the manga industry with a new $9.99 pricing, original left-to-right reading, and most importantly, a previously locked out audience who were now reading manga voraciously. Their initial titles, to go with what they called the 100% authentic manga line, were pretty split 50-50 between shoujo titles and manga made for men. Keeping in that same demographic of younger teens, they introduced manga like Karikano, Kadocha, and Paradise Kiss, of which Karikano was definitely their first big shoujo hit in that line. And their next big hit was when they released the absolute behemoth of a series, Fruits Basket. One of the best-selling shoujo manga in America, with volume 15 having shipped out 2 million copies to stores, and also getting me into manga. Fruits Basket in general was also just one of the biggest hits from the manga boom. It was competing fiercely on the charts with Naruto and Bleach, without an anime currently airing on Cartoon Network even. It is thanks to Tokyopop that introduced these titles to young girls who felt welcomed into the community that manga got big. Articles upon articles in this era credit teen girls at the time for creating this manga boom in 2002 and only ramping for years to come. Companies saw girls wanting to read comics, wanting to read shoujo. Since a Viz Media VP in 2005 said that most manga buyers, about 60% of them, were girls. For something like comics, which was seen as a boys' club in America, this was pretty unprecedented.
You'll tell people that 60% of who was reading manga at the time was girls, and they won't believe you. They'll tell you, nuh-uh, girls, because it's that popular consensus, girls are not into comics, girls are not into manga, they're not the ones reading, it's all the guys, they're the ones that are reading and spending money on it. But if you know anything about anything, about the fandom, it's always been the girls. They're the ones that are reading, they're the ones that are spending money, they're the ones that are driving the fandom. From anecdotal evidence, if you, like me, were around at the time going to these bookstores, who was reading the manga at the time? It was the girls. Who at school was reading manga? It was the girls. Who was making those clubs? It was always the girls. Who was at the library? The girls. All the time, it was the girls. I don't believe it was 60% because I'm pretty sure it was 70% of who was reading this was all the girls.
Like I said, Viz didn't entirely give up after the 4 shoujo stories debacle, but it did take them until 2005 to find their own spot in the shoujo market. Mostly because they previously hadn't nailed down that teen girl audience that they wanted. They scrapped the Viz shoujo line, which was home to series like Basara, Banana Fish, and many more, rebranding it to the shoujo imprint that we have now, Shoujo Beat. This was both as a manga magazine because Shonen Jump was selling for them at the time, and a manga imprint. With this new launch, Viz steered away from the more psychological, supernatural titles of the Viz Shoujo line, and appealed closer to the same sensibilities and age bracket as Tokyopop's audience. Thus, they found themselves a more dedicated group of young teen girls who were actually reading their shoujo this time. It was in this magazine that current-day bestsellers like Nana and Vampire Knight emerged. At the time, Nana wasn't as much of a hot commodity as it is nowadays, but of course, Vampire Knight was a certified club classic. And you know that when I go to the club, I better hear those club classics. Vampire Knight was really Viz's first shoujo hit, and also the other shoujo that could actually compete with Fruits Basket's success. This gave them a reason to keep sticking with Shoujo Beat, even if many of their other titles weren't really making it as big as Vampire Knight did. Because of the success of Tokyopop and Viz, so many other publishers spawned around this era as well, like Del Rey, ADV, DMP, Gokomi, CMX. There were so many manga publishers in this time. And all of them wanted a piece of that shoujo pie that was so delicious. CMX explicitly stated that they wanted that young girl audience that they were seeing manga get, since DC was not really able to with their comics. Del Rey at this time had a smattering of titles like Shugo Kyara and Kitchen Princess, which both did really well for them. Then you also had Gokomi, which was a much smaller publisher that only found a little bit of success in this time, but their initial launch consisted entirely of shoujo manga titles. The only problem is that these companies were really small and just did not have the same shelf space that the big two manga publishers, Viz and Tokyopop, did. So, that 15-minute mark is coming up. What's gonna happen, guys? It is always fun to talk about forgotten shoujo manga, but the inevitable has come. The manga bubble popping, followed by the economic crisis that happened in 2008. Something I never actually explain in detail in any of my videos on these manga publishers, because I don't want to make an utter fool of myself. I was in high school in 2008, and I was truly too busy reading High School Debut to give a fuck if my dad was gonna get laid off. I was too busy blasting Butterfly while rhythmically hitting arrows in DDR while my parents screamed about the stocks crashing. And you know what? The only thing that has really changed in those days is that instead of DDR, I'm playing Beat Saber while my husband tells me we're screwed.
This is getting ridiculous. You've been playing Beat Saber for 3 hours. Colleen, we need to talk. Colleen, I need you. I need you to stop playing this right now.
Don't worry though, I watched this crash course video, and you can too. The gist of the whole matter is that housing at the time seemed profitable, and bad loans were given because of this. Then, people couldn't pay their mortgages, and financial companies went bankrupt. The lesson? The government should actually do their job and regulate things. But they didn't, and this caused a widespread recession that toppled so many industries in this time, subsequently making everyone in America tighten their wallets except for the ultra-rich. So, that booming manga industry? Yeah, that was starting to sound like just a slight rumble of an anime character's stomach. The first hints of the recession affecting publishers was the slowly declining sales from 2007 to 2009. When right before this, the exponential growth was the only future in sight, the downturn of sales was showing a new possibility. Then, the first casualty that hit shoujo fans was in 2009. Shoujo Beat, as a magazine, was discontinued, with Viz directly citing the economic climate as the reason for its demise and needing to funnel their resources elsewhere. Shoujo Beat was one of the last remaining shoujo magazines, as ones before it, like Animerica Extra and Smile, had already fell by the wayside. Don't worry though, Shonen Jump was still there for years after. In a roundtable about Shoujo Beat's end, led by Bridget Alverson, many of my current gripes with manga companies were echoed in 2009. While I understand that Shoujo Beat had a smaller audience, that is a function of society at large, and I'd hope Viz was aware of that from the get-go. Girls cross over and read Shonen Jump. Guys will not in the same way. I would hope that was obvious going in. So where are the female comic fans supposed to go now? And how much of a slap in the face is this, however unwitting on Viz's part, in reflecting the state of the industry at large? Also, how much will this move, like the demise of Minx, cause commentators and industry folks alike to chime in with, Well, this proves there's no real teen girl audience for comics anyway. This is something I harp on all the time, and because sexism is the dominating ideology that we all live under, will probably not change in most of our futures. Girls are expected and encouraged to read across the aisle for any type of media like TV, movies, comics, anything that are directed towards boys. Yet, this same crossover appeal is rarely seen in many things for girls. In fact, they're often mocked and derided for being too trashy, even if they have the exact same concept as the more male-dominated thing. It's just a little bit too feminine. This is how you get old reviews from the Shoujo magazine saying incredibly sexist comments about the stories in it. Mind you, that statement was from just the end of Shoujo Beat, which was literally only the tip of the iceberg of everything to come. In the following 2 years, the manga industry proved to be struggling hard. So many different manga publishers announced layoffs and companies closing. CMX, which hardly made a profit, was shuttered by DC. Go Komi all but disappeared off the face of the earth, and Viz ended up laying off 40% of their employees. Later in 2009 also saw the closure of one of the biggest bookstores at the time, Walden Books. An early adopter of manga in bookstores, as well as one of the biggest stores for the teen girl audience to buy manga from, leaving teen girls hanging even more with places to buy or even look at manga, since internet purchasing wasn't a huge thing still at the time. Or at the very least, the sentiment was that online purchasing in 2009 was probably just a little bit too sketchy still. The final 1-2 punch came in 2011 though, when Borders announced bankruptcy and Tokyopop decided to close its American offices. While the writing was on the wall for both of them, it still kind of felt like these two companies were too big to fail. Yet, here was one of the biggest bookstore chains owing several manga publishers millions upon millions of dollars. And on the other side, you had Tokyopop just absolutely running on fumes due to the ever-changing interests of their CEO, Stu Levy. Just two more of the most crucial aspects for teen girl manga readers that just left them in the dust as they disappeared. After all the debris settled, manga publishers no longer saw the shoujo audience as a viable market. With barely any brick and mortars and fewer manga publishers having manga to offer, girls had little to look forward to on releases. From my own personal experience, this was also the same time that I was forced to move on from manga, so it does make sense to me why this would be the case for many other people too. You can only read the same title so many times before wanting to find something new. And if no company is putting out new shoujo titles or promoting them, then you're not gonna find many more things and eventually just not pay attention anymore. For me, there was a couple different reasons for this. I visited the library less because I was in my senior year of high school. Also, my parents couldn't really afford to purchase me as much manga unless it was for special occasions. And I did start to put my energy more into photography because that was what I wanted to make a career out of. It was in no way their fault, but at the time, girls were blamed for no longer purchasing manga in mass quantities like before the recession. One such myth that persists even now is that they had just all left manga to go read Twilight instead. At the time, manga fans were mostly in their preteens, and people really believed that after these girls grew up, they just didn't care about comics anymore, moving to more adult hobbies like YA novels. However, this is a logical fallacy as well as something that I find to be deeply sexist. Yes, millions upon millions of girls were reading Twilight in 2008, but that does not directly correlate to taking away from manga readers. Quite the opposite, actually.
Yeah, it's a logical fallacy because the argument doesn't make any sense. How are you going to tell me that the shoujo girls stopped reading manga because of Twilight, but you're not going to have that same energy about the shonen boys and say that shonen dipped in sales because they were too busy playing video games like Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto? no one says that because they just assume that the boys are still reading the manga and they blame the dip on sales and something else. It's not like there wasn't some really popular shoujo manga about vampires on the stands at the exact same time that Twilight was coming out.
And if I can give a personal example for when I identified as a teen girl at that time, I got into Harry Potter at the exact time that I was voraciously reading manga, and I had a very easy time loving both of them. Girls, like any other person in the entire world, have a myriad of interests all at the same time. Anecdotal evidence of thing A getting popular and thing B losing sales doesn't make those two actually have anything to do with each other. There's this weird phenomenon that people just believe that girls will age out of anything nerdy as they grow up. That old adage of girls mature faster than boys or whatever the fuck. Manga declines as Twilight begins. Must be because girls won't read manga anymore. Girls stop watching cartoons when they reach their teens. Must be because girls don't like cartoons. When in reality, this is all a feedback loop of girls feeling less catered to as they grow up and companies just not caring, thus seeing them as less profitable. Cartoon Network has now famously said that girls grow out of animation, and as Rachel Thorne noted, this has been the case for ages now. But this is just because girls are no longer considered as a viable consumer after childhood. One of the biggest reasons that shoujo has always struggled to get as many sales as shonen is because of their lack of anime adaptations. While Naruto was on Cartoon Network, had video games, cards, all that stuff, the equally best-selling shoujo title, Fruits Basket, had basically none of that. You had copious amounts of girls going out to buy manga, but the American media companies found no viable way to let girls into their audience. The former Viz Media VP said as much in a couple different interviews as well. The first time saying that broadcasters were just more comfortable with marketing things towards boys, and the second time saying that everyone dances around shoujo as if it's some sort of mouse spotted in a men's-only kitchen. Fruits Basket sold incredibly well, but because these companies are just scared of the teen girl audience, it could only reach a certain level of success because of that unwillingness. This is why shoujo has declined since the recession, as well as why we didn't see a resurgence of them again with the second manga boom. I've talked about it for years on this channel now, but for around the last 10 years now, shoujo anime has gotten even scarcer, especially during the 2020 manga boom, when anime adaptations for series like My Hero Academia, Jujutsu Kaisen, and Demon Slayer is really what fueled manga again. This was largely thanks to anime adaptations being accessible and manga having already been on the shelves. On the flip side, you'll rarely see a shoujo series even hit the BookScan charts these days. Firstly, because there's probably no anime adaptation, and second, because the manga may not even be licensed in English yet if there was an anime adaptation. Little marketing, no tie-ins, and no foresight is not going to get you a best-selling manga. When popular shoujo anime, Yona of the Dawn and Snow White with the Red Hair were both airing on Funimation in 2015, neither of these manga had been licensed in English yet. Yona's manga was at least announced later that year, but it didn't take until 2019 when we finally got Snow White with the Red Hair. Shoujo Beat has commented on this issue before, but only gave a measly, just because there's an anime doesn't mean they'll sell well, in response. While yes, this is true for literally anything, it's still far from the case when shonen has a popular anime and there's lots of online chatter about it and the company responds in kind. Despite the very obvious that shoujo are not read as diversely as shonen, companies keep expecting girls to pay the price for societal sexism, since that goes hand in hand with capitalism to begin with. After Borders and Walden's had numerous stores close, where were the teen girls supposed to go to buy their manga? Time and again, it was proven that the boom was caused because manga became more accessible to a new audience. But then, after the numbers started to slow down, it's like they completely forgot about that. Not only blaming Twilight for taking them away, but also saying that it didn't matter because they were just casual fans anyway. In addition, manga output was essentially cut in half. Not just because we lost so many publishers in that time in the first place, but also because the ones that were still remaining decreased what they were putting out, becoming increasingly more conservative and selective. Viz had reduced its titles to 3/4 of what they put out before the recession, meaning there were going to be even less shoujo options for girls as well. The mid-2010s saw Shoujo be putting out maybe 2 to 3 shoujo manga every year. And Viz also stated in the second manga boom in the 2020s that they learned their lesson from the first recession and that they wouldn't become overzealous this time, which basically has kept Shoujo Beat to maintaining that similar output. Meanwhile, Viz just licensed the currently ongoing 80+ volume series Kingdom, yet apparently, shoujo series are too risky. Other publishers that were able to find their way on the other side of the recession area put out less series for teen girls as well. Yen Press said they were targeting a more general audience of older teens, yet most of their output at this time were very clearly shonen and seinen titles, with only a few targeting girls, which were their manhwa selections. I think pre-2020s, the only series I read from Yen Press was Maximum Ride, which wasn't like a shoujo or a josei or anything, but it was at least not the gory or ecchi titles that they had more of. Dark Horse had picked up a lot of slack for the clamp titles that were lost when Tokyopop went under, but other than that, they were still primarily a comics publisher and focusing more on seinen manga. Lastly, the Japanese-owned company Kodansha showed up in 2008 and took back a lot of Tokyopop's former Kodansha licenses, like Sailor Moon, and they also grabbed up some former Del Rey titles after that company went under too. However, Kodansha is going to Kodansha, and as a Japanese company, I don't really expect them to care that much about shoujo either. All of these things have made it incredibly visible to me how the recession affected shoujo manga both after the crash and in the long term. From 2002 on, you would always see a handful of best-selling shoujo titles on the book scan charts. You had companies that were scrambling to license shoujo because it was such a new and lucrative audience that they had never had in comics before. But now you would think that Sailor Moon is the only shoujo manga that was ever made. You could blame the charts being dominated by shonen series on their massive backlog, but it also has largely to do with the fact that these companies just no longer see shoujo manga as a profitable market. They're seen as niche now, since shoujo fans were only a mere passing craze that didn't get capitalized on because shoujo was too broad. This is why Shonen Jump is the predominant type of manga that you'll see in most countries. It has always seemed easy and profitable to direct media towards men, as women are just seen as too difficult to figure out market-wise. So they're passed up, because you know what? They'll read and watch stuff for men anyway. Not just because girls would have basically nothing to do if they didn't, but also just due to the fact that they have been conditioned since they were young to relate to male-targeted media. The same can't be said for men, as sometimes it can be such a huge hassle for them to even read something written by a woman. For any leftist, this should come as no surprise that sexism and capitalism are intertwined. The two work in tandem as the capitalist system was built off the back of gendered oppression. Capitalism isn't just a set of economic laws, but is a social order in which the justifications for sexism are provided, where the actual effort of getting that product into the hands of the audience is a moot point, often making it so that girls are essentially punished because boys won't read what they read. This means capitalism and sexism don't just influence each other, they also reinforce each other. Just two stupid bitches telling each other exactly. The crazy part is that women make up the majority of the global spending, yet still feel like they are not catered to in their products. That goes for apparel, their finances, even their hobbies. Because in a world that values capitalism, maximized profit is the main goal, and that serves men first and foremost. Trying to justify the exclusion of women's interests because of numbers and stats forgets the actual people behind them, all of which is just a means to an end for not catering to more than half of the population.
The numbers arguments are just, they are flawed, they are always biased, they are never made with good intent. They are just flat out, it's a stupid argument, because it is an argument that is equating commercial success with artistic value, when that's not equitable at all. This is like if you wanted to come to me and compare two movies. On one hand, you have a movie that is the newest installment of a massive Hollywood blockbuster franchise. And on the other hand, you have this critically acclaimed, just widespread praise, independent drama film. And you're gonna sit there, and this is saying that objectively, because the franchise movie has made multitudes more profit than the drama, that it has to be better. That's what this argument is saying. And I'm not even saying that it's wrong if you prefer one over the other. I'm just saying it's not objective. You come out saying that you like the indie drama better, and someone's gonna tell you, oh, well, the Hollywood blockbuster sold like 10 times more, made 10 times more money. You're not gonna be like, oh yeah, well, I guess that one was better, so I changed my mind. No, because it's your opinion. Like, it's based off of your feelings and what this piece of art made you feel. The argument is largely anti-art, which is a huge part of why it's just a stupid argument. Anyone who brings up numbers as an argument as to why something has any worth, I completely tune out, because it tells me that they don't actually view any of this stuff as artwork. It's just things for them to argue numbers. It's the most boring bullshit thing, and it's so biased. It's so one-sided, because these same arguments are never put against the things that they care about. They only use these arguments to tell you why you should stop asking for the shoujo title that you want. Shoujo ABC should never get licensed because Shoujo XYZ sold poorly. But never do they use that same energy to talk about shonen titles. And it's always comparing against the biggest sellers, stuff like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and One Piece, these massive titles that make so much money, and they're trying to compare something smaller from magazines that don't sell nearly as many copies as Weekly Shonen Jump, titles that do not have anime. But guess what? It is applicable to those shonen titles, and exactly the two that I mentioned, because both JoJo's and One Piece sold terribly when they were first introduced to American audiences. One of my favorite manga of all time is Slam Dunk, and it sold awfully. But there's no one out there that was going to tell you that Slam Dunk, a 31-volume sports manga, by the way, didn't deserve to be published. There's no one out there that was going to tell you that. And despite the fact that it sold terribly, Viz still put that out there. For what reason? By the metrics and the arguments that these people are bringing up, they would tell you that it shouldn't exist, that it shouldn't have been around. But it's okay for them to demand that those be republished, and the same allowance isn't given to the shoujo fans. So it's one-sided, it's bullshit, it's anti-art, the numbers argument is terrible.
Shoujo manga sits in the crossfire of these two ideologies. It already has to clear a higher bar as a demographic that's specifically made by and for women, but then it must also exceed those expectations by maximizing profit for companies. The fact that shoujo manga was cared about at any point in time has less to do with the fact that these companies actually cared about a female audience. They didn't at all. Companies just found a way to maximize their profit and happened to stumble across the teen girl reader. But those readers were never valued as much as their male readers, since if the teen girls were actually valued, they wouldn't have been ditched at the first sight of economic downturn. The first manga boom and bust has served as a reminder to me of the perpetual state of sexism that this industry decides to stay in, undervaluing both shoujo manga and its audience by never giving it a chance to flourish, even if it is somewhat of a niche audience. I feel like some people think that for shoujo manga to be valued, it also has to be economically viable as well. However, that's just the capitalism in you talking. Smack it out. Shoujo can both exist for an underserved audience and also not be the most economically viable, profit-maximizing thing around. Just how copious amounts of shonen can exist on the market, even if not every single one of them are economically viable either. This will probably never be that way, because Sexism. There will always be an occasional series that gets pushed to the top, but the promotional efforts and popularity of shoujo should not have to solely rely on men actually giving a fuck about it for once. So yes, while girls were primarily the reason that there was a manga boom in the early 2000s, they were also the scapegoat for its quick fall, likely becoming the reason why shoujo manga is seen as risky to license, and also probably why most manga fans nowadays could barely tell you what a shoujo is anymore. It has been a bleak spot in the second manga boom for shoujo fans, though I am semi-optimistic of where we could possibly go in the future. We are in no way given the same enthusiasm as shoujo fans were prior to the market crash, but there are some good titles coming out and some companies seeming to actually care about the shoujo manga fans, like Yen Press and Seven Seas right now. Meanwhile, the more mainstream publisher Viz seems to want to capitalize off of anime adaptations again, as they had licensed A Star Brighter Than the Sun before it got announced for an anime adaptation earlier this month. Kodansha, well, let's just hope they get their shit together soon. I want to end this video optimistically, but in this current climate, it's kind of hard to. With another possible recession due to incoming tariffs and just general uncertainty, it's hard to say where any of us will be in the immediate day-to-day. So instead of trying to figure out a solution and a snappy ending to conclude this video on, I'm gonna do what I do best. Drown out the sadness, the economic downturn, and the lack of shoujo manga with just a little bit of Viz Media.